Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to thank and pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast, produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Sero Boost, where we talk about happiness and the science behind it. Today, I'm very excited to talk to Laura, and we are going to talk about self-care, ways to take better care of yourself. Laura Heath is a registered pharmacist, college professor, integrative nutrition health coach, certified Whole30 coach, and certified wellness life coach with a specialty in the psychology of emotional eating. And there's so much more. But Laura, thank you for being here. And I'm excited. Please feel free to introduce more about yourselves to our audience, because I'm sure everyone would be interested to know, why you got to where you are today, why you're doing the work that you're doing, and maybe a little more of, maybe more information that we didn't cover in that short bio.
Thanks, Lou. I'm excited to be here. I'm in Ontario in Canada, and by trade, I'm actually a hospital pharmacist. So I've been a pharmacist for 23 or 24 years, and I've worked exclusively in hospital in that time, primarily with cancer patients and medical patients. And probably about 4 years ago, kind of took a step back and looked at the patients who I was taking care of and saw how they came through the door time and time again with often lifestyle-related illnesses. There's so many things that we don't have control over when it comes to our health, but then there are a lot of lifestyle-related things that we do have some ownership and some power over. And, as I was thankful to have Western medicine and the medicines that I provided to make sure that they were safe at the right dose for the right conditions that these people had, I also still was often thinking about, I wish they weren't here. I wish I could prevent them from coming through my door in the first place. And that's where the idea was kind of born of, what if I was able to live the best of both worlds and practice in modern medicine, in Western medicine as a hospital pharmacist, but also do some coaching, some preventative medicine in a way to meet people before they ever came through my hospital doors and help them with their health, their wellness, their lifestyle, their habits, the way that they eat, they take care of themselves, they love themselves. And so I did both. And I started my business called Your Highest Self Coaching, where I coached particularly women who identify as emotional eaters, but a large group of people in either individual capacities, group capacities, or even in corporate capacities. And so it's been a lovely mix of, thank goodness for Western medicine, and I still get to do this job of being a hospital pharmacist a little bit. But then the bulk of my time is spent in this coaching role, where if I am able to meet with you and we can tweak some little things about your lifestyle, we could prevent you from coming through my doors in the hospital in the first place.
Wow, that's super cool. I just like how, your double, triple role, they just kind of intertwine and they have this correlation in some ways. And it's a really interesting background. Like, you're doing, because initially when I read your bio, I was like, you should do pharmacist. You're a pharmacist, but you're also a professor and you're also doing coaching. That's interesting of a mix, like it's the first I've seen such a mix. So glad to have you here. And I think today we're going to talk about self-care. And I'm sure since you've coached a lot of people, you have a bunch of things to share with us about self-care. But before we start, going into the interview part where, we really digest these questions and things that you're going to share with our audience, we would love to get to know about you a little better and get some recommendations from you if possible. So the first thing that we do is a section we called Have You Met with Laura? So in this section, I'm going to throw some words at you, and it'll be great if you can share the first thing that pop up into your mind, or something that you really love and you would like to share with others. First is a book. What is a book you would recommend?
So this might sound a little bit weird, but I love the book, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. It's a book written by Bronnie Ware, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but she basically was a caregiver for a number of people at the end of their lives and started gleaning information about what they regretted in their lives on their deathbed, which, could sound a little bit morbid, but really to me, it's quite beautiful because now we have this information to be able to look at for our own lives and really honestly ask ourselves the question, what would I regret? Would I regret any of these things? Because I can do something about it right now. So I really loved reading that book. And I probably read that about the time that I made that decision to do a little bit of both worlds when it came to coaching and pharmacy, and thought, I'm going to work on these things so that I make sure that as I'm living my life, it's in alignment with who I am, who I want to be. And as in her book, she says, not the life that somebody else thinks you should lead.
Yeah, I really love that book. Last year, it was on top of my favorite list because she's an Australian author, first of all. And second of all, the stories that she told, I was just like, wow. You don't hear these stories very often. And the way that she just shared the insights and even her journey unfolding through that period as well was kind of like it was really interesting, intriguing, and kind of suck you in, and you really just want to keep flipping the pages. So I really love that one. Thank you for sharing. And what about a movie that you really love or you would like to talk about?
So I don't watch a lot of media, hardly at all, but a movie that I love is On Golden Pond. So that's like 1980, 1981, I think it came out. And to me, it's just a beautiful story about family and growing old, connection, love in just very simplistic, real life terms. So my husband and I first watched that movie when we were dating many years ago, and then watched it many times over. And probably, in hindsight, looking back, the fact that the two of us loved that movie so much and really neither one of us watched a lot of media, it was a good sign of, I think we're pretty compatible, because probably not everybody would, at our age at that time, 19 or 20, would have fallen in love with a movie like that. But it's still one of my, probably is my all-time favorite.
Oh, that's such a sweet story. I've never watched that movie, but now that you're talking about it, I'm going to have to put that on my list. So thank you. And this is a must ask on our show. What is a podcast that you frequently listen to or you would recommend to others?
So right now, I'm in love with Hidden Brain. So the host is Shankar Vedant. And I just really like the storytelling mixed with the science, where he's kind of looking at our human behavior from this lens of, our unconscious mind almost, and unpacking it for you in this way that a story unfolds or multiple stories unfold to make it easy to understand and kind of like applicable in terms of, well, how could I edit this, or what could I do in a different way? And sometimes you're just captured by the story as well as what there is to learn about science behind that story.
Yeah, totally. I've heard a few of our guests saying that they love that show as well. So it's quite popular for people that study or are specialized in other people's happiness. It's really fun. I actually still have not listened to it because if I'm honest, I don't listen to many podcasts nowadays since I get to talk to all these amazing experts. But yeah, that's a good one. If I ever need to find a podcast, I'll turn to that one. What about your famous role model, or if not famous, then your personal role model?
So I think because I don't really pay attention to a lot of media, like popular media, my role model is more kind of in this space, I'd say, because the first person that comes to mind is somebody like Brene Brown. And for me, her being a researcher and a professor, and the work that she's done specifically around shame and vulnerability and imperfection, she really speaks to me. I think at this point in my life, I was like supposed to find her and listen to her message and really kind of own it myself, as well as share it with the population that I coach. So when I hear her talk, I think she is so vulnerable and she is willing to kind of share all the messy parts, which kind of inspires me to be able to do the same. So to put down some of that perfection and some of that little bit of a wall of, ooh, I don't want to look too imperfect, and be like, here's the whole messy me.
Yeah, I love Brene Brown. Like I talked to her. I talk to my friends about her so many times. You have no idea. Like I just keep raving about her. I read all her books. And like I just, whenever I feel a little down, I just turn to her videos and hear her audiobooks again, because I feel like she's like my friend. And I feel like I can talk to her, even though, like I haven't talked to her yet. So, it's, I can totally relate with you. And finally, what is a course that you've completed that you would like to talk about?
So I think related to my work with emotional eaters, some of the training that I've done is in that realm. So the psychology of emotional eating is a course that I took through the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. And that's probably one of the, kind of biggest and most recent courses that I've done.
Nice. That is a really good one. And I just love that you're studying about what you're doing. That's such a great reminder whenever someone says that. Alrighty, so now we've got to know you a little better, Laura, and let's talk about happiness and self-care. That's what we're here to talk about today. So the first thing we always ask our guest on all the episodes in this show is, what does happiness mean to you? Because it's very different for different people.
Yeah, that's right. When you think about it, I think it's probably an evolving answer for all of us. When I think about happiness, I think about being here, now, and present. So for me, happiness is being in this moment right now. And I think in this moment right now is where you can find connection and wisdom, love, compassion, all of the kind of positive emotions that often come with happiness. Whereas if you're somewhere in the past, you're probably ruminating in some shame, perhaps some guilt, more negative, difficult emotions. And if you're in the future, you're probably in a place of anxiety, perhaps overwhelm, worry. And in each of those places outside of right here and now, it's very hard to find happiness. And I think happiness is a state of being as opposed to trying to cultivate or to, have it be made. It's just when you're in this space here and now, you have the ability for happiness to be in that space with you.
Yeah. Wow, that's a new definition on this show. I can tell you that. We have a wide range of definitions, but this is the first time someone's talked about being present as the singular. Like this, that is the only way you would define happiness. It's very beautiful and quite interesting to hear from that perspective. And what about some of the misconceptions? What are some of the misconceptions that you've noticed people have when it comes to happiness? Could be based on your definition, could be based on your personal experience.
I mean, I think the biggest misconception about happiness is that we tend to look for it outside of ourselves. I think when you're here, present now, happiness is something that is cultivated from within. But I think the biggest misconception is that I'm going to go out and search for happiness. Like I'll find it in that job, or I'll find it in that relationship, or I'll find it in the number on the scale, or some external thing is going to bring me the happiness I'm looking for. I think that's a misconception. I can cultivate and own it right here and now, regardless of whether I have that job, whether I have that partner, whether that person likes me, whether that person spoke about me in a certain way, none of that actually matters because it's here now and within. Bearing in mind, I think we have to have our basic needs met. There has to be a basic level of safety, and we have to have enough money to survive. Beyond that, all of these things that, well, when I get more money or when I get the bigger house, those are the things that I think are a falsehood when it comes to happiness. Yeah. And I think that's probably well proven in the science. Like, the person who wins the lottery is not more happy.
Yeah, totally. I couldn't agree more. And I think that is a beautiful way to talk about the topic of the day, because when you just talked about, happiness, it comes from within, I immediately think about self-care. Because, a lot of the time we don't spend time on self-care and we don't nurture our happiness from here. We actually go out, we do things for people, we do things for others. Let's just say if you have multiple roles, if you wear different hats in the day, you're an employee, you're a mom, you're a wife. There are a lot of things that you would do for other people, for example. And so self-care is probably the last thing that you have time for. And I talk to a lot of my friends about this, actually, once they start to have new roles in their lives. And it's just kind of like they get carried away. So let's talk about self-care now, because it's so important. How would you define self-care, and how does it affect our level of happiness?
So, I think to me, very simply, self-care is doing acts of love for ourselves. The things that actually feel good to us, the things that nurture us and take care of us, allow us to show up as our best version of ourselves each day. And those may not be the things that society tells us self-care are, or the typical things that the media might tell us that self-care are. But really, self-care is doing the things for me that best serve this mind, this body, this spirit.
Yeah, totally. Well, for a lot of people, this is actually new. I don't know if you've come across anyone who's kind of like, what's self-care? I don't know. Because I can tell you, I have heard from people where they're actually not that familiar with the concept of self-care in the first place. And so even finding acts that would be, that would be good for them is kind of a challenge, because I think it also, it probably comes from self-awareness as well. Sometimes you don't know what is good for you, and that really affects self-care. And I think in that sense, this conversation would really help, people who are not familiar with the concept of self-care to get to know themselves a bit better and to start exploring, different ways that they can incorporate self-care in their lives. Because to me, I think it's very important to my happiness. What I've noticed is when I don't do anything for myself, if I don't have my alone time, if I don't journal, if I don't read, if I don't take time to slow down or just be by myself, and those are my kind of acts of self-care, I get depleted and I feel unbalanced, like imbalanced, and just kind of not okay in a way. And a lot of the time, I kind of run away from my problem and don't do self-care. So that affects my level of happiness. So personally, I think self-care is where you start to nurture that level of happiness that you have from within. But for a lot of people, it might mean different things as well. To them, self-care is non-negotiable, for example. Like to others, it might mean self-care is a way for them to just really recharge, and all of those things I think would lead to happiness.
Yeah, like what you're talking about with that awareness and then being able to cultivate what your own self-care is I think a super important part, right? That somebody else isn't going to tell you this is what you should do for your self-care, but that you have your own awareness of really this, I think of the analogy of filling up your cup, right? Like if you are going around serving everybody all day long and serving from that cup, what do you do to fill that cup up for yourself so that you actually have something to give. And that's where that cliche around like self-care isn't selfish comes from. If the cup isn't already filled for you, it's not going to continue to overflow so that you can give to other people. Whereas if you can figure out what are the things that I need, what are the things that fill me up so that I can go about the world and help you and do something nice for you and care for you while I've also taken care of me, we both win. Everybody has a happier state and, I think a calmer and more complete feeling state.
Yeah, definitely. Couldn't agree more. I feel the exact same way when I do acts of self-care. And I think it also fills me up when I see other people, honor their self-care as well. And I know that in our research team saw this, I think somewhere you describe true self-care as unbeautiful. So I'm very keen to hear more about this because this is new. We've talked about self-care. I have a basic understanding of self-care. It's not that new to me, but this is the first time I've heard that true self-care is unbeautiful. Could you please tell us more about this?
Yeah. I mean, if you think of the opposite of unbeautiful, so what media might present to you as more beautiful looking self-care from the outside, I'm talking about the opposite of those things. So beautiful self-care is something that is, an expensive trip somewhere or a full spa day that maybe costs hundreds or thousands of dollars or a manicure or pedicure, some sort of beautification for yourself, which there's nothing wrong with those things. And maybe they do fall into your self-care as part of the routine of your self-care. But really the things that fill up that cup, that bring you happiness, peace, contentment, fulfillment, all the things we want in this world, to me, they're much less beautiful. They're unbeautiful. And for each of us, they're going to be different. But, if I think about myself and some of the self-care routines that I have, from the outside looking in, somebody else might think there's nothing very sexy about that or beautiful about that. But to me, they're filling me up. They're giving me the life that I want to live. So something like batch cooking my food on a Sunday morning, that's an act of self-care for me. For many people, they might say, oh, that looks terrible. There you are for 3 hours on Sunday morning, cooking all your food for the week, you poor thing. Whereas I'm like, this is amazing. The rest of my week, my brain doesn't have to take any power to figure out what I'm going to feed my family, what I'm going to feed myself, how are we going to get through the week and have enough time to cook. It's all done. That's self-care. Self-care might be the unbeautiful setting of an alarm clock at 5 a.m. to meet your girlfriend for a workout. And that's a very personal thing. For me, I love a morning workout. In the evening, you're not going to get me anywhere near any sort of exercise. It's not my self-care. But that 5 o'clock alarm or the waking up early and doing that workout with somebody that, your hair is a mess and there's no makeup on and you're throwing on your shoes and going out the door, it's not super beautiful. But if it fills you up and you feel amazing afterwards, that's the self-care that you need, that unbeautiful self-care. Sometimes I think it's just allowing yourself to be less than perfect, to be worthy right here, right now, even the messy version of you, especially the messy version of you, and allowing and kind of embracing me, the imperfect me. Again, it's not a beautiful thing for somebody looking in, but for you living it, to accept you here right now, imperfect and messy and vulnerable, that feels amazingly beautiful. So it's this, balance of an unbeautiful look from the outside, perhaps, but if you're the one experiencing it and it's working for you, it feels beautiful, even though it looks unbeautiful. I have a million examples of that for each individual person. It's going to look like something different, but I'm such a morning person. So, what might sound like a terrible thing for somebody else to get up at 5 a.m. and do that workout and do the rest of my morning routine that I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about today. That is an unbeautifully beautiful thing for me.
Yeah. Wow. what would I use? Which word would I use to describe that? That is beautiful, I think. And I think it's also a reminder to a lot of us that self-care needs to work for you and no one else. You don't have to worry about how it looks to others, I guess. Like it should be unbeautiful, if that's what's going to make you happy and fill your cup. And I really resonate with you. And you're like, yeah, morning workout, same here. I just look terrible going out in the morning, going to the gym, but it makes me feel so happy and just, I don't know, it sets my day up. And now that I've got back into it, last year I did a lot of morning walks early in the morning when it's like still pitch black. This year I'm going back to the gym and just doing that again. And I feel like it looks like from the outside, definitely not great. I was talking to some friends the other day and they were kind of saying, so I'm working out with one of my girlfriends and another friend was there and she was like, you guys wake up way too early. You work out way too early. And I was like, it's actually the norm now. It doesn't feel like it's too early. It feels like it's perfect, like the perfect time, because I would finish my workout and then the sun would come up. So then it's kind of like this really beautiful moment in the morning where I'm just like, yep, I'm here. I'm doing my things and I have, time to myself. And we're going to talk about morning routine. You're right, because this is very important. For me, it's been a journey. And I can tell you, being on this show, hosting this podcast throughout the year that I've had, like I've changed out my morning routine quite a bit. And that's why, we're here today because we're talking about morning routine. It happens very interestingly that a lot of people, and I heard this from one of my colleagues, she cannot do anything in the morning until 10 a.m. So don't expect her to do anything else before 10 a.m. So I think that's kind of interesting to me because our world is, set up in a way that is kind of like you have the 9-to-5 life. But for a lot of people, they don't have the luxury of having their morning routine because they're just not morning people. So this is kind of interesting. We're going to get into a territory where people might go, yeah, I agree with you. Or they might go, that's not going to work for me because our morning workouts work for us, but they might not work for others. So this is an act of self-care, like the morning routine. So how would you describe the benefit and how would you sort of share a bit more perspectives for those that are struggling with their morning routine, especially for those that are not really morning people?
The first thing I do is probably step back and say, if you're not a morning person, part of honoring the fact that you're not a morning person is part of your morning routine. Like maybe that's an act of self-care. If you're able to swing a schedule where you don't kind of get going till 10 a.m. and your best time is a later period of the day and you can make that work in your work schedule and your life, that sounds like self-care to me. There's still a morning routine to be had because you're still rising at some point. So whether you rise at 5 a.m., 6 a.m., or 10 a.m., I think a morning routine can still apply for you. Of course, we all have limitations with how much time we have in our morning routine space because we do have a job or a child or a parent or some responsibility to possibly be somewhere at some point doing some sort of productive work. However, there's an opportunity, even if you're not a morning person, to carve out that time for yourself. And I'm not talking about 2 hours, though if you have it and that's how much time you want to use, great. I think the whole idea of what your morning routine is can come from all sorts of experts. There's all sorts of information out there about what you should do for a morning routine. I'm much more likely to say, well, what works for you? Why don't you do some trial and error? What feels good in your body to set you up for a day that you have success and happiness and contentment with this thing that you do in the morning or these handful of things that you do in the morning. And, for myself personally, that tends to involve gratitude practice. So making sure that I write down at least 3 things that I'm grateful for every day. It involves a meditation practice where, depending on the time that I have in the morning, somewhere between 5 and 20 minutes of time for a meditation practice, a journaling practice for me. And again, all of these things the journaling and the meditation and all of the little pieces of my morning routine may not be your morning routine. So figuring out, I love exercise in the morning versus I love it at night. I love meditation in the morning versus I love it at night. What is it that sets you up for success in your day? And not success from a point of view of go get it success, but more, I think of success in my day starting where I know that I'm in my body, I'm present, and my shoulders are here. They're not here. That's how my morning routine has worked. Because if I'm walking around like this, I need that morning routine really badly. And that's kind of how my gauge of a morning routine works. So for those of you who can't see me, I'm like scrunching up my shoulders like that stressed out, sympathetic fight or flight state that most of us jump out of bed and go right into because we've got to get everywhere and do everything and be everything. And there's no time for self-care. There's no time for morning routine. If you can carve that time out where whatever the practice is allows you to bring yourself back down to a parasympathetic state where your cortisol levels are not sky high, where you are breathing deeply, where you're able to be present, that to me is the morning routine for you, whatever that looks like.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really nice way to put it. You just said it perfectly. I think it needs to be something that works for each person. And then at the same time, you still need to carve out that time. It's so important. It's basically non-negotiable for your self-care, for your level of happiness, right? Because, I'm not sure about the research, but personally, I've had a period where I got really lethargic. I did not want to do anything in the morning. So previous to the morning workout, Lu, we have, the morning in bed, Lu, doing nothing basically, because I was really just did not feel like doing anything. And I can tell you, I felt like that period just went by like a blur. And I do not enjoy that feeling. And I think that's where we really need to value just having something, for our self-care morning routine, even if just one thing. I used to roll out of bed and straight to my desk. I would start working. And I feel like that is the worst thing ever. Like I just did not set myself up for anything. I don't know how my day started. I don't remember how it ended. And I think having a morning routine after that completely changed my perspective because I could compare the two situations. And I could kind of see, previously it was like this. I was not feeling it. I was not in my element. I wasn't happy. But now I'm happier. I'm not saying that I'm like perfectly happy, but I'm happier because of these little things that I'm doing in the morning. I meditate, I, go to the gym and then have coffee, have my breakfast with friends. And I think it's just changed my life overall dramatically. Like I feel like I am at a much better place mentally, emotionally, physically. Everything is kind of in sync. So I couldn't agree with you more. I think another thing that you mentioned that I find to be very interesting, I'm super keen to ask you about this, is self-care isn't about taking the trip, but rather about building a life that you don't feel the need to escape from. Now, when I told you that little story earlier, that was exactly how I felt before. Like I just did not feel like I was living my life at all. And I felt the need to constantly escape in one way or another. Now I'm a little more grounded. I'm guessing that is what you're talking about, but please tell us more.
Yeah, exactly. I think that you've got a self-care routine that works for you when you're in a place that you do feel a little bit more grounded, that you are able to experience happiness along with all the other emotions. We're not supposed to feel happy all the time. We're supposed to experience the entire gamut of what we will call in air quotes positive and negative emotions. But when you're living a life that doesn't have self-care in it, where you're going from thing to thing to thing and you're not in the present moment and you're not taking care of you, that is the space where you're looking to escape all of the time. If I can just get away on the trip, if I can just book that long weekend thing, if I can just get some space away from this boss, all I need is to have a weekend to myself and then I'll be okay. That mindset doesn't work from a self-care perspective because we're not okay. when we go back to Monday and it's still the reality of Monday that we are very unhappy in, that we dislike in every way, that we're not present in, that we're laying in bed and can't get out of bed and don't have any joy or purpose or structure to our day, that to me is not self-care. So how do I cultivate a life that I don't need to escape from? Again, that unbeautiful self-care becomes very beautiful in this moment, because then I'm just living my everyday simple life, but I don't feel like I need to find a way to escape from it. And of course, that escape can come in all sorts of different ways, right? It might be that I think I need to take the trip, but not all of us can afford the time or the space to take the trip to get away from the life that we haven't cultivated, that is not, that is not serving us. So I think that's where we find ways that we sometimes think we're doing self-care, but we're not at all. And those things are just like trying to take the trip, ways to block out the real life, to numb, to buffer, to try to make ourselves feel better. But in fact, we're doing that in a temporary way. So what I'm talking about there are things like numbing out with alcohol, or eating food to feel better when you're not actually physically hungry, or scrolling incessantly on social media, or watching just one more Netflix show and one more show after that and one more show after that, and not putting ourselves to bed. So those are all examples of trying to escape from this life versus, oh my goodness, what could I do to cultivate a life that I don't need to use any of those tools for, whether it's the trip or the 15 shows of Netflix deep and now it's 2 a.m. and I haven't gone to bed, So for me, my sleep is just like one of my superpowers. That is an ultimate act of self-care. And when I put myself to bed and I go to sleep at the time that I want to, which is super early, Lu, then that sets me up such that the morning routine feels beautiful and the day feels beautiful and I can be present and I don't need to escape from any of that. That doesn't mean my life is perfect. Each of our lives, I'm sure, are far from perfect, but we're able to cope with the ups and downs because we've got this self-care built in. And then we don't need to find these little ways to continue to try to escape.
Yeah, absolutely. I've felt that need for a really long time. As I told you earlier, right? It's kind of like I wasn't there, and I feel like I needed to really tune back into myself. And I made the switch, like just by waking up early and getting a morning workout in, I feel like a completely different person. And I've been talking about this for the past couple of weeks now, and I just really want to encourage others who are probably struggling with this, maybe, to try it. Even if you're not morning people, like I wouldn't say I'm 100% a morning person, but I decided that I would become one because it'll make me feel better. It's just changed my life dramatically in such a great way. And I feel like we should all try it. If it doesn't work, you can always go back. If it doesn't work, you can always take a nap. And it's just so simple, but it's gonna have such a great effect. And I think another thing I find interesting, and this is what our team suggested, they found from your work, is that you believe that self-care means that you're willing to show up as your vulnerable self in the world. Now, I think this is connected to the previous point, and if you can connect the dot for us, that'll be great. I really love this because, as I said, I'm also a huge fan of Brené Brown, and I just really love vulnerability, and I try to embrace that in whatever I do in life, whether it be work or, like friendships, other kinds of relationship, and even to myself. Obviously, not perfect at it, but trying really hard and doing my best. But to those that are new to this concept, why is letting yourself be vulnerable an act of self-care?
So if we flip the tables and think about the opposite. So if I'm not being vulnerable and I'm not being me and I'm trying to be perfect and I'm trying to cultivate a life that looks like a perfect Instagram feed, but I'm actually barely holding myself together because of that facade that I'm trying to hold up, that feels terrible. Yeah. That is a place where you're constantly having a conversation with yourself about how you're not enough, and you need to get to this thing to be worthy enough. And the negative chatter that goes on with, I must do all the things, and I should do this, and I should do that, and I have to be perfect, and the world needs to see me this way. All of that to me is a very exhausting place to be. So it's not that it's easy to be vulnerable and imperfect, but I think the work of practicing to take off some of these layers of this shield that we kind of put around ourselves allows us to come to a place where we feel so much better, we have so much more happiness, and our self-care feels a lot less effortful with time. So it's a complicated thing to wrap your head around. So I'm supposed to let myself be out there and let everyone see my imperfections, and somehow I'm going to feel like that's self-care and happiness. I don't think so, Laura. But, I think when you consider the alternative of what you may be living in now, if you're somebody who has a perfect facade and doesn't want anyone to see any one of your imperfections, and you don't let your feelings show, and you don't let people in, and you have kind of a closed off space, it's worth reflecting on how that does feel. Does that actually feel good? Does it feel like self-care? Or is that the life that you're trying to escape from all the time because it's so darn hard to live that perfect facade? So I've kind of thought about this myself, of like the idea of unpeeling layers. Like, for someone who I think much of my life probably related to my profession as a pharmacist, grew up to believe that everything had to be perfect. Everything that I did, everything that I said, the way that I looked. I remember even as a young kid, like my hair had to be, the ponytail had to be just right going out the door. Everything had to be perfect. And that works really well in some areas of your life, where as a pharmacist working in a cancer clinic, everything has to be perfect, right? You can't make a mistake. So that served. But then allowing myself to say, but wait a second. Does that have to occur in every other area of my life? Do I have to be perfect? Or could I unravel some of this pretend perfection and be a little bit more me? And what has happened with that, and what I see with my clients, and what you see with the work that Brené Brown has done, is that feels better. That feels hard to do in the moment. That may take time to do. But on the other side, you are your real self, your imperfect self, your vulnerable self, and you're probably a happier version of yourself because you're actually you, not somebody else that you're pretending to be for the facade of whatever you're trying to have the rest of the world look at you and see.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, this philosophy is something that we should all embrace because, as I said, some of us are more familiar with Brené Brown than the others. And I feel like this is also a big part of just acknowledging when things are wrong. And, I think this is so important because most of the time, we all have the tendency to kind of shield ourselves from making mistakes or even owning up to our mistakes. And that's totally normal as human. Sometimes our first reaction is, I'm right. And I think probably a lot of people can relate with me on this. And it takes practice to slowly kind of not have that reaction straight away, but to kind of slow down in interactions with your own self and with others to kind of say, you know what? Yeah, that was wrong of me there. And a lot of the times, this is what you did wrong to yourself in the first place, not even to other people. Because I remember having conversations with my friends where they just kind of we would talk about something and they would just go, no, I just needed to do that. And that, whatever that was that they mentioned, I can tell you 90% of the time, it is something that they shouldn't have done in the first place. Continuing dating that person, or dropping out of that course, or staying up late that night and just going out that night instead of doing what they should be doing for their self-care by staying at home and really just journal or meditate. These little things happen all the time, and we just have that tendency, I feel like, to protect ourselves. We think that we were protecting ourselves by saying, nope, I was right. But I think being vulnerable enough to say, you know what, I was wrong there, I should have done what you told me. That is courage, that shows vulnerability, and it shows self-care as well, because you're actually improving and you're actually listening to yourself, listening to what is right. I have this friend recently that kind of went through something like that, and she was just kind of like, oh yeah, like I just really don't care, and then like I don't care about this, and I'm just going to keep going with this, and kind of like ignore that voice in her head saying that this is not where you should be going with the situation. Exactly same thing happened, like she acknowledged later on that, yeah, I should not have done that, but the vulnerability wasn't there, and it was hard because this is not easy. It's so much easier said than done. So I think it's important to also kind of emphasize the fact that when you know what it is, it will take time to practice, to embrace it. It's not like, yeah, from today's podcast, you know what vulnerability is and you're going to embrace it 100% after listening to this. That's not going to happen, at least for me.
No, you're right. I think it's probably a lifelong practice. And if you listen to Brene Brown, she'll say that too. You don't just like become imperfect and now everything's great. You don't just become vulnerable and then you're done being vulnerable, because life keeps going, circumstances in our lives continue to unfold, and we get to keep practicing, just like you practice gratitude and you practice meditation. I think you practice vulnerability. And part of that, doing it well, probably gets easier when you do it from a place where you actually love yourself. Like, I'm being curious, I'm being compassionate, I'm doing this from a place of self-love so that I can peel off a layer, so I can take this onion down a layer, not because I have to or need to or because, I should, but because this actually feels authentic and good. This feels better than the fake or perfect version of me otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good reminder. I can tell you, like, we're just talking about this now, but I'm going to walk out of here today and I'm going to keep thinking about it, because showing up in the world, being vulnerable is really hard. Some days I do it better than others. And, someday I'm tired and that's the last thing I want to do. The last thing I want to do is to be vulnerable. But then on most days, I try to do my best. And hopefully our audience would embrace the same thing, just do their best to show up as their true selves. So that is something new for some people, I would say. There's a lot more to unpack. And I feel like this is, as you said, a lifelong practice. People will have to start looking into it themselves, because maybe they're kind of saying, I'm already vulnerable, but then when they really think about it, were they, right? So this is something to take and practice for each person. But on top of that, I wonder if you notice anything, some other misguided acts of self-care that you've seen in people, perhaps, because this would really help our audience to actually do an audit on their self-care, because maybe they're doing certain things that they're like, oh yeah, this is how I'm doing self-care, but in reality, it's not really helping them.
Yeah, when I think about kind of misguided acts of self-care, I think they probably come from a place of shoulding on yourself and from actions, so the shoulding on yourself is like, I should get up at 5 a.m. and I should do a workout and I should do my meditation and I should give 110% at work and I should make sure I do homework with my son tonight and I should put myself to bed at such and such a time. And I think when you're coming from a place where you're not doing what feels best for you, but you're doing what you think you should do, that's a misguided place, that it's not that any of those things might not be great for you, but it's more like you said earlier, where let's do some trial and error here, see what feels good, see what doesn't, and then adopt these things, maybe one by one, a little bit at a time. It doesn't have to all happen overnight. But when you come from a place where these are all the things that I have to do to be the perfect self-care human, then what's going to happen is I'm actually not going to feel that great, because I can't even fit it all in and it consumes all of my time and I'm not even present because I'm busy doing all these things for self-care. And at the end of the day, self-care doesn't feel like caring. It just feels like checking off a checklist that some external person told me I should do. So, I mean, that's one of the first things that I can think of. The other is like just doing all those things, but not making an assessment of whether they feel good for you. So, if we take our 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. workout as an example, if you're dragging yourself out of bed and you've done it for 2 weeks straight to do a morning workout and you hate every minute of it and you feel terrible after and the rest of your day feels just not good, don't continue an action that doesn't feel good just because, well, there, I'm doing the self-care, I'm getting my workout in. There should always be that curiosity and that self-reflection of, how does this work for me? How does this feel for me? This idea of filling up my cup for me is a great analogy that I can see visually all the time. Is this filling up my cup, or did that just deplete every last drop out of that cup? But I called it self-care, and that's what makes it worth it. I don't think so. I think that's misguided.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. Sometimes all you need is sleep. For people that have so many hats that they're wearing, maybe the act of self-care is to sleep in a little bit in the morning and just, get up and have a slow morning. Something like that. It depends on your life circumstances, and it's not what anybody else is saying, because a lot of the time we just get so heavily influenced with, things like social media, people around us, all these ads, and, they just like, do this for yourself and for your health and for your mental health. But then when you do it, it's actually not working out for you. So that's super important. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So we have a bunch of questions from our audience, but I think this question would be very practical, and we can even apply this in the practice section later. So I'll save it. But first of all, let's talk about the practice. What do you think would be a practice for anyone who's very new to self-care? They've never done self-care before, or they don't even know if they've been doing self-care. What is one thing that that they can do to start?
So this might sound not typical, I guess, or, perhaps not what everybody would come up with initially. But as I've practiced self-care over the years, and as I've worked with a number of clients in groups and individually, it all comes back to the way that we speak to ourselves. So I think if you were to enact one thing when it came to self-care, I would start with learning how to practice self-compassion, how to be kind to yourself, which for some of us, that might sound almost counterintuitive, like, oh no, I have to really make rules for my self-care, Laura, or else I'm never going to follow them. I can't possibly trust my intuition or myself. My advice to you would be to take a step back and approach self-care with kindness, to approach it from a place of compassion, where you actually lovingly, for real, which I think takes practice as well, like to lovingly put your hands over your heart and go, what do I need? What is it that would fill up my cup? How can I be kind to myself today? And, when we're talking about the people who I work with a lot of the time, and they have issues around their food and they think that they overeat or they eat too much, they might think that self-care is restricting their calories and making sure not to eat too much food and, following the latest diet plan, when really what they need is to love themselves enough to trust that they can take care of themselves in terms of the food that they eat. Love themselves enough to make a beautiful meal for themselves today. And I think sometimes we think we have to fight our way or willpower our way or muscle our way into the self-care. Whereas I'm offering a different way of looking at it, which is a much softer approach, which often gets better results than the bullying way that we've maybe tried and perhaps had success with. Maybe we bullied our way through school and that's how we talk to ourselves to get good grades and do good things. And maybe it didn't work for you, though, in a lot of different ways. So moving to this area of how do I take care of myself, I think it has to come from a place of kindness and self-compassion.
Yeah, absolutely. You already listed all the benefits there, so that's going to convince people. But I guess just like self-care, self-compassion is something that's also completely new to people. So what would be some of the challenges when people start to embrace this practice, and how should they overcome it?
So I think when you start a self-compassion practice, or when you look at yourself with compassion, the biggest challenge that I find is that there's an inner voice in you that's going to counter all of that kindness and that compassion. There's an inner critic in all of us, and she's a challenge. She's also useful to hear, because once you hear her, you can't unhear her. And then you have an ability to speak back to her. But to me, she's the biggest challenge, because if you're trying to say, I'm going to be kind to myself, and what is the loving thing to do for myself today? The challenge is the critic's going to say, Laura, this is not how we get stuff done around here. You need to get yourself together. You need to do X, Y, Z. You need to hurry up and get all this done. Stop with the fancy niceness. You know what? This is how you got to do your stuff and get stuff. That voice is, to me, that inner critic is the biggest barrier. We can work with her. We can notice her. We can go, wow, you're not nice, and I'm going to learn how to talk back to you. But the first thing is just recognizing, oh, she's there. And she's a barrier, because sometimes her voice is much louder than, I'm going to be loving and kind to me today. I'm going to whip myself into shape, and I'm going to do this workout no matter what. I will find myself at the gym because I look terrible. That is mean and terrible, and it's a barrier.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I hear you loud and clear. It's just, it doesn't work that way. And I saw this really funny video the other day where somebody wanted to go to the gym because they want to feel stronger. And that's how I've been feeling as well. And it's supposed to be like this comedy reel, so it's not like that person actually did this, but the trainer was kind of saying, so how much weight do you want to lose? And that person's like, no, I don't really want to do that. I just want to be stronger. So you don't want to, so, and then the other person, do you want to be leaner? And the other person's like, no, not really. And I think that's like truly embracing yourself and, like having self-compassion to go, I love my body as it is, and I would love to be stronger, because that's my problem as well. Like, my arm's really weak. I can barely lift any weight. So that's my problem that I want to deal with, not because of the way that I look. And I think it's important for all of us to remember this point, because self-compassion doesn't mean saying things like, oh yeah, you're never going to improve anyway, so might as well not care about it. But it's more so, I embrace the part of me that's like this, and I'm going to work on so and so to make myself feel stronger, happier, better, like mentally fit, or things like that. I think it's very tricky, and I learned this from talking to the different experts on this show before. Like it's a very fine line between being kind to yourself, and really acknowledging your imperfections, just like Brene Brown said, versus, just going all out and critiquing yourself. Because sometimes you thought that you're being honest, but that honesty doesn't help, because it's actually self-critic. It's not self-compassion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we think that honesty is accurate. Like, no, actually, that's the real voice. That's the truth. Well, when you take a step back and say, but is that true? Often you're able to realize with the compassionate lens that what you're saying about yourself is not true. Because often we'll say, if you think about the women I work with who are emotional eaters, they may hold more weight on their bodies than they want. But they're worthy right now. They're worthy right now for loving care, for embracing exactly who they are. They are enough right here in this space. And that critic is going to try to tell them differently. No, you're not worthy until you're this number on the scale. You're not worthy until you can run 2 kilometers without stopping. I mean, and we maybe believe that because we've maybe heard her talking to us like that for decades. For the population I work with, they maybe have thought for their entire lives that they are not the right size for worthiness. And for an entire lifetime, they've had this voice saying, you'll be enough when, you will be good when you have this size, you'll be able to, meet these standards, then you're good enough. You think that's true. So questioning, is that true? Is compassionate, oh my gosh, maybe I really truly am enough right now. And that compassion is much more likely to get you to a place where you can enact some sort of self-care, whether that's a beautiful lunch today, whether that's a walk on your break, or whatever it might be for you that fills up your cup.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Well, thank you. And I think it's just easy and simple as doing this the moment that you want to start your self-care practice, just practice self-compassion straight away. And this might mean for some of us, we might need to do this every day. For others, it might mean a weekly check-in, whatever works for us, because it doesn't sound like it's a strict thing when you have to kind of like every single day at the exact same time, you have to do this, because that's a form of self-care as well. Doing this when it works for you, right? Like that's how I would see it.
Yeah. I mean, for myself, when I think about anytime I hear an inner critic voice, then I train myself to go, where's the self-compassion here? Let's have a counter voice to that. My beautiful, loving inner self, she has something to say back to you. So it's not that I have it timed on my calendar for a certain time of day or time of week. It's more a practice of, oh, there's some negativity here. I'm going to counter that with self-love. I'm going to counter that with some kindness and compassion. Oh, I messed up today. I didn't do the self-care. I didn't do the workout out. I didn't get up at the time I said I was going to. Instead of, as you hear yourself from that negative voice, tell yourself how you failed on your self-care today, the opportunity there to practice self-compassion instead comes in. So it's almost when your slip-ups happen or your failures happen that you have the opportunity to bring this self-compassion practice into play. Because when you're doing things well, you're unlikely to have to bring it to the forefront because you feel good. When you're doing things in a way that you've made a mistake, in air quotes, or slipped up or didn't do the thing you said you were going to do, that's where your self-compassion muscle deserves some workout.
Yeah. Oh, I just really love that analogy. Thank you. And I was saving this question. I was so excited when I saw it. But, based on all the things that we've just described and discussed, self-care, self-compassion, being just really kind to yourself and try to understand yourself better. What do you think is the highest form of self-care?
The highest form of self-care, I really think comes back to loving yourself. Like this self-compassion, this kindness towards yourself, this allowing your vulnerability, all of the things that we talked about today. The highest form of self-care is truly believing that you're worthy right now, that you're worthy of love, you're worthy to take up space in this world, that you are enough. Because when you believe that, then first of all, your happiness is going to be much more likely to be in a place that feels good, right? If you're always worried about whether you're enough or you have space in this world, it feels very uncomfortable. It does not feel good. But from a self-care perspective, if you can just start with, I love myself and I'm worthy of all the good things that I want to bestow on myself, that might be hard for some people to say. I know myself, it's taken me probably since the beginning of this practice of moving solely from pharmacy work to coaching over a 4-year period to be able to say, no, I actually kind of like me. I want to take care of me. And when you come from that place of self-love, I think it's a lot easier to then enact self-care.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful message. I'm being silent because I'm taking it in. I really love that. Thank you so much. And before we wrap up this conversation, we have open mic. As I mentioned to you earlier, this is your platform to talk about anything that you would like to talk about today that we probably haven't addressed, or maybe it's a different area of interest that you would like to share with the audience. So please take it away.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'll probably just maybe talk a little bit more about myself and what I do when I'm not in the hospital pharmacy, because this coaching work that I'm doing, it's exciting as I evolve and grow. It's divided right now into a couple of different aspects. So one area is coaching women in particular who identify as emotional eaters. And I think you can see from our conversation today, understanding vulnerability and self-care and self-love and all of these topics are really important as you go into managing and helping somebody get to a place of food freedom, moving away from a place where they're emotionally eating. Because as you can imagine, when we emotionally eat, it's not about the food. We're not eating because that food is calling us, even though that's what our brain is telling us, like, I can't resist it because there's nothing I could do. It just has power over me. That's not what it's about. It's much more about the way that we're thinking and how that's making us feel in the world. And so getting to the bottom of what is going on for me, what would be the kind, compassionate thing to do? How do I take care of this body and love it right now so that I can understand why I'm doing some of these things to myself that don't serve me? Then what comes with that naturally is weight loss and, a right-sized body that you feel good in. I think it's such an interesting place that you come to somebody to diet and try to get the weight off, and it's all about the food, and all of these diet plans that are out there are about food. But really, where the suffering happens in all of these women's lives is in their own minds and what they think about their worth and their value and their size and whether they're worthy to be in this space, in this body. So figuring out what's behind this eating, for sure, yeah, it'll allow some of that weight to come off, but then really the mental weight that comes off, that's kind of the joy of my work, to see these women move from a place of kind of incessantly having this conversation in their head around food that feels terrible to a place where there's peace around food again, and that it's not feeling like it's controlling them and that they have peace in their own space. So that's a big piece of my work. Another piece of my work that has been in the last year and a half or so is in doing corporate coaching work. And so I suppose as I came into the coaching environment and COVID kind of shut everything down, that was a dream of mine at the beginning. And you can imagine why I didn't go out and start doing conferences and everything at the start. But it's been a fun journey now to start getting back into that corporate space, and even in a virtual community, which is much more acceptable now, to be able to do wellness presentations and talks around some of these topics, of vulnerability and self-care and all of the things that come with a healthy workplace. That's been a fun evolution for me as well. And I'm excited to see where I can evolve especially, I guess, when I'm in a place where I am willing to be vulnerable. Whereas probably 4 years ago when I started, I thought, all of this has to look perfect, and now I don't believe that at all.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing more about your work. And that is a really perfect segue for me to ask you, if our audience would like to get to know more about you or collaborate with you, how can they find out about you?
Yeah, for sure. I have a website, yourhighestself.ca. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, LinkedIn as well. LinkedIn, I'm Laura Heath, and on the other platforms, I'm Your Highest Self Coaching. They can always reach out by email too, which is laura@yourhighestself.ca. I'd be happy to hear from anybody who wants more information about my work. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. It's been a joy talking to you, and I feel like we could go on with this for a while because, there's still a lot more to talk about, but we'll save that for next time. We'll hope to have you back, and enjoy your evening.
Thank you so much, Lu. It was a pleasure.
You've been listening to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast, produced by the Happiness Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website at ha.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.